They said she was broken, worthless, a wolf without a soul. So when Lyra Vance found the dying Alpha King bleeding out in a blizzard that could kill them both, everyone expected her to walk away. Instead, she carried him 6 miles through hell itself and changed the fate of an entire kingdom. This is the story of the outcast who became a queen, the healer who started a war, and the love that no betrayal could destroy. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and stay until the end, because this story will leave you breathless. The wind screamed like a wounded animal. Lyra Vance pulled her fur cloak tighter around her shoulders, but the blizzard didn't care. Ice crystals bit into her exposed skin, turning her cheeks numb and her breath into shallow clouds that vanished the moment they left her lips. The frozen lake behind her had already disappeared into the white void, swallowed by the storm that had rolled down from the northern peaks without warning. She shouldn't have stayed out this long, she knew better. But the winter stores wouldn't fill themselves, and the ice fishing trap she'd set 3 days ago had finally yielded enough to last her another week. The canvas sack slung over her shoulders sagged with frozen trout, their scales glittering faintly in the dying light. It wasn't much. It never was. But it was survival, and survival was all Lyra had left. The cabin was still 2 miles away, 2 miles of knee-deep snow and wind that could strip the flesh from bone if she let it. Her boots crunched through the drifts with mechanical precision, each step a small victory against the mountain that had tried to kill her 100 times before. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the faint trail she'd carved through the wilderness over the years. This place had no name, no roads, no neighbors, just her, and the ghosts of the life she'd left behind. The memories came without permission, as they always did when the world grew too quiet. The faces of her former packmates, the sneers, the whispered insults that followed her everywhere she went, the day they'd gathered in the ceremonial clearing, waiting for her wolf to awaken during the sacred shifting ritual. It never came. While the other young wolves howled and celebrated their first transformations, Lyra had stood alone in the center of the circle, trembling and empty. The elders had waited. The pack had waited. Even her own father, the pack's head healer, had waited with desperate hope in his eyes. But the wolf inside her remained silent. Broken. That was the word Elder Thorn had used. Not cruel, but clinical, as if she were a tool that had failed its purpose, a vessel that couldn't hold what it was meant to carry. The pack didn't exile her outright. That would have been kinder. Instead, they let her stay, but only as a shadow. She was forbidden from attending pack hunts, pack ceremonies, pack anything. She worked in her father's healing cabin, grinding herbs and stitching wounds while the others lived the lives she'd been denied. And then her father died. Heart failure, the elder said. But Lyra knew the truth. He'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to prove she wasn't broken, trying to find some ancient remedy, some forgotten ritual that would wake the wolf sleeping inside her. He died believing he had failed her. After the funeral, Lyra had made her choice. She'd packed what little she owned, walked out of the valley, and never looked back. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of solitude. 5 years of silence. 5 years of proving she didn't need a pack to survive. The wind shifted suddenly, slamming into her from the side and nearly knocking her off her feet. Lyra staggered, catching herself against a snow-covered boulder. Her fingers were numb inside her gloves. Her legs ached. The storm was getting worse. She needed to move faster. But then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. Low, guttural, pained. Lyra froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she turned toward the noise, squinting through the swirling snow. For a moment she saw nothing but white. Then, there. A dark shape sprawled across the ground about 30 yards to her left, half buried in a snowdrift. An animal. No, not just an animal. A wolf! Lyra's breath caught. Wolves didn't come this far north. The packs kept to the lower valleys where the hunting was easier and the winters less brutal. The only reason a wolf would be out here alone was if the creature stirred, lifting its massive head just enough for Lyra to see the blood matting its dark fur. Even from this distance, she could see the tremors running through its body. It was dying, and it was enormous, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen, larger than even the strongest alphas in her former pack. An alpha! Lyra's mind raced. This wasn't her problem. Whoever this wolf was, whatever had brought him out here, it had nothing to do with her. The storm was getting worse by the second. If she didn't move now, she'd freeze to death before she made it home. Logic screamed at her to keep walking, but her feet wouldn't move. Because 5 years ago, her pack had walked away from her when she needed them most. They'd called her broken and left her to wither in the shadows. And she'd survived by telling herself she was stronger than they ever gave her credit for. What kind of person would she be if she did the same thing to someone else? Lyra cursed under her breath and dropped the sack of fish into the snow. She staggered toward the wolf, her legs burning with every step. The wind tore at her cloak, threatening to rip it from her shoulders. Snow battered her face until her vision blurred, but she didn't stop. When she finally reached the fallen wolf, the sight made her stomach twist. He was worse than she'd thought. Deep gashes ran along his side, oozing dark blood that steamed in the freezing air. His breathing was shallow and labored, and there, on his hind leg, a silver arrow shaft jutted from the muscle, the metal already blackened with poison. Wolfsbane. Lyra's hand shook as she knelt beside him. Wolfsbane and silver together were a death sentence for any wolf. The poison would spread through his bloodstream, shutting down his organs one by one. Even if he survived the night, the damage would be irreversible. He was going to die, unless she did something. The wolf's eyes cracked open, pale gray, almost silver, blazing with a ferocity that should have been impossible for someone so close to death. They locked onto hers, and for a heartbeat, Lyra forgot how to breathe. She'd seen alpha eyes before, commanding, dominant, meant to make lesser wolves submit. But this was different. This was power, raw, ancient, absolute. Whoever this wolf was, he wasn't just an alpha. He was something more. The wolf's lips pulled back in a weak snarl, but there was no strength behind it. His head dropped back into the snow, his eyes sliding shut. Lyra's mind screamed at her to leave, to run, to save herself. Instead, she grabbed him by the scruff and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, easily 200 pounds, maybe more. Her boots slipped in the snow as she tried to lift him, her muscles screaming in protest. The wolf groaned, a sound so broken it made her chest ache. "Come on," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare die on me." She didn't know why she cared. She didn't know this wolf, didn't owe him anything. But the thought of leaving him here to freeze alone in the dark made something inside her twist with a pain she couldn't name. With a desperate heave, Lyra hauled the wolf's upper body across her shoulders, gripping his front legs to keep him balanced. His weight nearly crushed her, her knees buckled, but she forced herself upright, step by agonizing step. The cabin was 6 miles away. The storm was a living nightmare, and she was carrying a dying alpha on her back. This was insane. But Lyra Vance had stopped caring about sanity a long time ago. She started walking. The first mile was hell. The second was worse. By the third, Lyra's legs had gone numb. Her vision swam. Her lungs burned with every breath, the freezing air slicing through her like knives. The wolf's weight crushed her shoulders, grinding her bones together until she was sure something would snap. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because if she stopped, they both died. The wind howled around her, a relentless wall of ice and fury. Snow piled up to her thighs in some places, forcing her to wade through drifts that threatened to swallow her whole. Her cloak had torn free an hour ago, lost to the storm. Her gloves were soaked through. Frostbite gnawed at her fingers, and still she walked. The wolf stirred occasionally, groaning against her shoulder. Each time she whispered to him, words she couldn't remember later, nonsense meant to keep herself sane as much as him alive. "Don't you dare die. Don't you dare. We're almost there." They weren't almost there. They were barely halfway. But the lie kept her moving. The 4th mile broke her. Lyra collapsed into the snow, the wolf tumbling off her shoulders. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her hands clawed uselessly at the ground. Ice filled her mouth. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. "This is it," she thought distantly. "This is where I die." The wolf's eyes opened beside her, those pale silver irises finding hers through the storm. And for a moment she saw something there, something that looked almost like gratitude. No, not gratitude. Recognition. As if he knew what she was doing, as if he understood the price she was paying, and somehow that was enough. Lyra dragged herself to her knees, then to her feet. She hauled the wolf back onto her shoulders, ignoring the way her body screamed in protest. And she kept walking. The 5th mile blurred together into a nightmare of white and cold and pain. But then, through the swirling snow, she saw it. The cabin. A dark silhouette against the storm, barely visible, but there. Lyra's breath came in ragged sobs as she staggered the last 100 yards. Her boots hit the wooden steps. Her shoulders slammed into the door. It swung open, and she collapsed inside, the wolf tumbling onto the floor beside her. For a long moment, she just lay there, gasping, her entire body shaking. Then she forced herself to move. The fire had gone out hours ago, but she had dry wood stacked by the hearth. Her hands fumbled with the flint, sparks flying uselessly, until finally, the kindling caught. Flames licked up the logs, filling the cabin with blessed warmth. Lyra turned to the wolf. He was still breathing, barely. She grabbed the medical kit her father had left her, the one she'd kept all these years, even when she'd thrown everything else away. Bandages, antiseptic, a pair of iron tongs, and a vial of powdered silver root, the only thing that could neutralize wolfsbane. Her hand shook as she worked. First, the arrow. She gripped the shaft and pulled, her stomach twisting as the wolf's body convulsed. Blood poured from the wound, hot and dark. She packed it with silver root paste, her fingers slick with gore. Then the gashes. She cleaned them one by one, stitching the deepest with thread that had gone brittle with age. The wolf's breathing hitched with every needle pass, but he didn't wake. By the time she finished, dawn light was creeping through the cabin's single window. Lyra sat back against the wall, exhausted beyond words. The wolf lay on her floor, his massive body rising and falling in shallow, steady breaths. Alive. Against all logic, against all odds, alive. Lyra closed her eyes and let out a shaky laugh. "You better be worth it," she whispered. She didn't know who he was, didn't know why he'd been out there, didn't know what would happen when he woke, but for the first time in 5 years, Lyra Vance didn't feel alone. And that was enough. 3 days passed. The wolf didn't wake. Lyra tended to him as she would any patient, the way her father had taught her. She changed his bandages, monitored his breathing, dripped water into his mouth to keep him hydrated. The fever that had gripped him the first night finally broke on the second day, but still, he slept. On the 4th morning, she woke to find him watching her. Lyra froze, her hand halfway to the water bucket. The wolf's pale gray eyes tracked her every movement, sharp and aware, intelligent, and unmistakably alpha. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then the wolf's body began to shift. Lyra scrambled backward as bones cracked and reformed. Fur receded into skin. Claws became fingers. Within seconds, the massive wolf was gone, and in its place lay a man who was very much naked. Lyra's face burned as she grabbed a blanket and threw it at him, averting her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. The man caught the blanket and wrapped it around his waist, his movements slow and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding together. "Kael." He paused, his pale eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Kael Draven, King of the Northern Territories." Lyra's heart stopped. The king. The wolf she'd saved, the stranger she'd carried 6 miles through a blizzard, was the most powerful alpha in the realm. And judging by the look in his eyes, her life was never going to be the same. The silence that followed Kael's revelation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Lyra stared at the man sitting on her cabin floor, wrapped in nothing but a threadbare blanket and the weight of a title that could crush kingdoms. The king of the Northern Territories, the apex predator of their world, the alpha that every wolf in the realm either feared, respected, or both. And she'd just saved his life. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the broken, dying wolf she'd carried through the blizzard with the man now watching her with eyes like winter steel. He didn't look like a king. Not here, not like this. Pale from blood loss, bruises mottling his ribs, silver burns still angry and red on his leg where the arrow had pierced him. But those eyes held the kind of authority that didn't need a crown. "You're lying," Lyra said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were false. She could feel the truth radiating from him like heat from the dying fire. Kale's mouth quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm not. The king doesn't travel alone. The king doesn't get ambushed by common bandits. The king doesn't. She gestured helplessly at him, at the cabin, at the absurdity of the entire situation. End up half dead in the middle of nowhere. You're right. Kale shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. The king doesn't, unless the people trying to kill him are inside his own court. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward until they touched every corner of the small cabin. Lyra's throat went dry. What? Kale's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked past her, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd been holding a terrible truth too long. 3 weeks ago, I received reports of unrest in the eastern border pacts. Disputes over territory, accusations of treaty violations. Nothing unusual. I decided to investigate personally, with a small escort, 4 of my best guards. He paused, his hands flexing against the blanket. We were 2 days from the border when they turned on me. Lyra felt ice crawl down her spine. Your own guards? Poisoned me first. Wolfsbane in my water during the evening meal. By the time I realized what was happening, I could barely stand. His voice remained steady, clinical, but Lyra could hear the edge of fury underneath. They didn't want to make it look like an execution. Too many questions. So they stripped me of my weapons, shot me with a silver arrow, and left me for the wolves. But you're... Lyra stopped herself. She'd been about to say an alpha, as if that explained everything. As if raw power alone could overcome betrayal and poison. I'm still just a wolf, Kale finished quietly. And Wolfsbane doesn't care about rank. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Lyra's mind raced, trying to process what he was telling her. A conspiracy, assassination, guards who'd sworn oaths of loyalty turning into executioners. Why? She asked. Why would they? Because someone wants the throne. Kale's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something other than strength in them, something that looked almost like weariness. And they're willing to tear the kingdom apart to get it. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small her cabin felt, how isolated, how far from the centers of power and politics that shaped the wolf territories. You should have died, she said softly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I know. If I hadn't found you, I know. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. Past the title, past the authority, at the man who'd been left to freeze in the snow by people he'd trusted. What are you going to do? She asked. Kale's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. Go back. Find out who ordered the hit and make them pay. You can barely stand. I'll heal. Not fast enough. The Wolfsbane will take weeks to fully leave my system. I know. Kale pushed himself upright, ignoring the way his body protested. But I don't have weeks. Every day I'm missing, the traitors consolidate their power. Every day I'm presumed dead, they move closer to claiming the throne. Lyra stood, her hands curling into fists at her sides. Then you're an idiot. Kale blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You walk back into that court right now, you're dead. Lyra continued, her voice sharp. You said it yourself, someone inside wants you gone. You show up weak and poisoned, they'll finish the job. And this time, there won't be anyone stupid enough to save you. Then what do you suggest? The question came out harder than necessary, Kale's alpha nature bristling at being challenged. Lyra didn't flinch. You stay here. You heal. And you figure out who you can actually trust before you go charging back into a nest of vipers. I can't. You can, and you will. She crossed her arms, meeting his glare with one of her own. Because I didn't carry your heavy ass 6 miles through a blizzard just to watch you throw your life away on pride. For a long moment they stared at each other, an Omega with no pack and a king with no kingdom, locked in a battle of wills that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with sheer stubborn determination. Finally, Kale's shoulders sagged, just slightly, just enough. How long? He asked. A week, maybe 2. Until the silver burns heal and you can shift without tearing yourself apart. 2 weeks is not negotiable. Lyra turned away, busying herself with stoking the fire. You want to go get yourself killed? You do it on someone else's watch, not mine. Behind her, she heard Kyle exhale, a sound caught between frustration and something that might have been amusement. You always this stubborn? He asked. Only when I'm right. This time, the sound he made was definitely a laugh, rough and rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a long time, but genuine. Lyra felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. She quickly smothered it. You should rest, she said, not looking at him. I'll make something to eat. Lyra. She stopped, surprised he remembered her name, surprised he'd bothered to use it. Thank you. 2 words, simple, quiet, but they carried the weight of a kingdom. Lyra didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted my cooking. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Lyra kept herself busy with the mundane tasks of survival, checking her snares, mending her nets, chopping wood. Kyle recovered slowly, his body fighting off the last remnants of poison while his wolf healed the damage from within. He didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't act like a king at all. Instead, he helped. It started small. On the 3rd day, Lyra came back from checking her fishing traps to find him tending the fire, feeding it carefully so it wouldn't smoke. On the 4th, he'd reorganized her medical supplies, sorting the herbs and salves with a precision that suggested military training. By the 5th day, he was chopping wood, slowly, carefully, but with a determination that made it clear he hated being idle. You don't have to do that, Lyra said, watching him from the cabin door. Kyle sank the axe into another log, the blade biting deep. I'm not useless. I didn't say you were. You thought it. I thought you were injured. There's a difference. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. The silver burns on his leg were fading, but she could still see the shadow of them when he moved. I don't like owing debts. You don't owe me anything. I owe you my life. Lyra shook her head. I did what anyone would have done. No. Kale's eyes found hers, and there was something fierce in them. You didn't. Anyone else would have kept walking. Anyone else would have saved themselves. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Lyra looked away first. Yeah, well, I never was very good at doing what I was supposed to. She didn't elaborate, didn't explain, but she felt Kale's gaze linger on her, curious and searching. That night, as they ate a simple meal of roasted fish and root vegetables, Kyle broke the silence. You're not with a pack. It wasn't a question. Lyra kept her eyes on her plate. No. Why? Does it matter? I'm curious. She set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. I was. Once. A long time ago. What happened? Lyra's hands clenched in her lap. She'd never told this story, never wanted to, but something about the way Kyle asked, not demanding, just listening, made the words come easier than they should have. I couldn't shift, she said quietly, during the awakening ceremony when we're supposed to call our wolves for the first time. Mine never came. Kyle's expression didn't change. He just waited. The pack called me broken, said I didn't have a wolf at all. Just human, useless. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. They let me stay, but only because my father was their healer. After he died, there wasn't any reason to keep pretending I belonged. So you left. So I ran. The admission tasted bitter. I couldn't stand watching them live the lives I'd never have. Couldn't stand the pity. Or worse, the contempt. So I came here, where no one could look at me like I was broken. The cabin fell quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Then Kyle spoke, his voice low and certain. You're not broken. Lyra's throat tightened. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because I can feel it. She looked up sharply. What? Kyle leaned forward, his pale eyes intense. Your wolf. It's there. I've felt it since the moment I woke up. Quiet, yes. Dormant, but not gone. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. That's not possible. It is, and I can prove it. How? Let me help you shift. The words hit her like a physical blow. Lyra pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. No. Lyra, I said no. Her voice cracked. I tried. For years, I tried. Every ritual, every meditation, every stupid remedy my father found. Nothing worked, nothing. So don't stand there and tell me you can fix what's been broken my entire life. Kale stood slowly, his movements careful, non-threatening. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to help you find what was always there. Why? The question came out raw, desperate. Why do you even care? Because you saved me when you had every reason not to. Kale's voice softened. Because you're stronger than you think, and because I know what it's like to be told you're not enough. Lyra stared at him, her chest tight. You're the king. You're the strongest alpha in the territories. How could you possibly… I wasn't always king. Kale's jaw tightened. I was the third son. Weak, sickly, the one they said would never survive his first winter. My brothers were everything I wasn't, strong, ruthless, born to lead. And when my father died and the succession trials began, everyone expected me to fail. But you didn't. No, because I refused to believe them. He took a step closer. The people who said I was too weak, too soft, not alpha enough. I proved them all wrong. And you can too. Lyra's hand shook. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt, but the fear was stronger. What if it doesn't work? She whispered. Then we try again. And if it never works? Kale's expression gentled. Then you're still the woman who walked through a blizzard to save a stranger's life. Wolf or not, that's more than most alphas I know. Something inside Lyra cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice giving way to the first touch of spring. She took a shaky breath. Okay. Okay? Okay. I'll try. Kale's face lit with something that looked almost like hope. Now? Tomorrow, when I'm not terrified out of my mind. He smiled. A real smile this time, warm and genuine. Tomorrow then. That night, Lyra lay awake in her bed while Kale slept by the fire and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she'd always believed. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Lyra stood in the small clearing behind her cabin, her breath misting in the frozen air. Kale stood across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with focus. Close your eyes, he said. Lyra obeyed, her heart pounding. Now breathe, deep and slow. Feel the air in your lungs, the ground beneath your feet, the cold on your skin. She did. In and out. In and out. Your wolf isn't separate from you, Kyle continued, his voice low and steady. It's not something you have to call or summon. It's already here. It's always been here. You just have to stop fighting it. Lyra's eyes snapped open. I'm not… You are. Kale's gaze held hers. You've spent so long believing you don't have a wolf that you've built walls to keep it out. Walls made of fear, of shame, of all the things they told you that you believed. I don't know how to tear them down. Yes, you do. Kale stepped closer. You already did. The night you saved me. Lyra's breath caught. What? You carried me 6 miles through a storm that should have killed you both. No human could do that. Not without their wolf lending strength. But I didn't shift. You didn't have to. Your wolf was there, protecting you, keeping you alive. You just didn't recognize it. The words settled over her like snow, soft at first, then impossibly heavy. All this time, all these years. Had her wolf been there, waiting? Close your eyes again, Kyle said gently. Lyra did. Now stop thinking, stop doubting, and just let go. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple, but instead she took a breath, and another, and then she felt it, a flicker, deep inside, like a candle flame in the dark. Her wolf. Lyra gasped, her eyes flying open. I felt… Again, Kyle said, hold on to it this time. She closed her eyes, reached for that flicker. It slipped away, just out of reach. She tried again and again. On the 5th try, the flame grew stronger. On the 10th, it burned. And on the 15th, pain exploded through Lyra's body. She collapsed to her knees, gasping as her bones began to crack and reform. It hurt. It hurt worse than anything she'd ever felt. But underneath the pain was something else. Freedom. Her spine arched, her hands became paws, her scream became a howl, and then it was over. Lyra stood on 4 legs, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The world looked different, sharper, brighter. She could smell everything, the pine trees, the snow, the smoke from her cabin chimney. And Kyle. She turned to look at him and found him smiling. "There you are," he said softly. Lyra's wolf surged with emotion, joy, relief, triumph. She'd done it. After all these years, she'd finally done it. But the moment didn't last. Because that's when she heard the voices, rough, male, coming from the direction of her cabin. Kyle heard them too. His expression shifted instantly, going cold and deadly. "Shift back," he ordered quietly. "Now!" Lyra tried, panic flooding her system. Her body resisted, too new to this, too overwhelmed. "Lyra, focus. Shift back." She concentrated, pulling at the human part of herself. It took longer than it should have, but finally, the change came. She collapsed into the snow, naked and shaking. Kyle was already stripping off his shirt, handing it to her. "Get dressed. Stay quiet." "Who?" "I don't know, but they're at your cabin." Lyra pulled on the shirt, her fingers numb. It hung to her knees, oversized and smelling of pine and smoke. Together, they crept toward the cabin, staying low. Through the trees, Lyra could see them. 4 men, big, armed with silver blades and crossbows. They were tearing through her cabin, throwing her belongings into the snow. "Search everything," one of them barked. "If he's here, we finish it. If not, we burn it down and move on." Kyle's entire body went rigid. "Your guards," Lyra whispered. "No, mercenaries. But working for whoever paid my guards." His eyes tracked their movements, calculating. "They're hunting me." "How did they find—" "They didn't. They're searching the entire region, covering their tracks." One of the mercenaries emerged from the cabin holding her father's medical kit. "Found healing supplies, fresh bandages. Someone's been here." Another one grinned. "Then we wait. They'll come back eventually." Kale's hand found Lyra's arm, pulling her deeper into the trees. "We need to leave. Now." "Leave? This is my home. Your home is compromised. If they find us, we're dead." "You're still injured. You can't—" "I can run, and so can you." His eyes met hers, fierce and unyielding. "Trust me." Lyra looked back at her cabin, the only place she'd felt safe in 5 years. Her father's tools, her supplies, everything she'd built. And then she looked at Kyle, the man who'd helped her find her wolf, who'd given her back a part of herself she thought was lost forever. "Okay," she breathed. "Let's go." They ran. Through the forest, over frozen streams, across clearings where the snow lay thick and untouched. Kyle led, his movements fluid despite his injuries. Lyra followed, her newly awakened wolf lending her strength she'd never had before. Behind them, she heard shouts. The mercenaries had found their tracks. "Faster," Kyle urged. They pushed harder, lungs burning, legs screaming. The forest blurred around them, but the mercenaries were gaining. Lyra risked a glance back and saw them, 4 shapes moving through the trees with practiced efficiency. Hunters, killers. "Kyle, I know. Keep running." They burst into a clearing, and Lyra's heart sank. A cliff, dropping away into a frozen river 50 feet below. Dead end. Kale spun, putting himself between Lyra and the forest. His eyes blazed silver, his alpha presence flooding the clearing like a physical force. The mercenaries emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, smiled when he saw Kyle. "Well, well, the dead king walks." He raised his crossbow. "Lord Corvin will pay double for your head." Lyra's blood turned to ice. Corvin, the king's own counselor. Kale's expression didn't change. "Tell Corvin if he wants my throne, he should have the courage to take it himself." The mercenary laughed. "Oh, he will, right after we deliver your corpse." 4 crossbows lifted. 4 fingers tightened on triggers, and Kyle grabbed Lyra's hand. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She should have said no. Should have demanded to know what insane plan he had. Instead, she squeezed his hand. Yes. Then jump. Before she could process the words, Kyle yanked her backward. They fell. The mercenaries' shouts echoed above them as the cliff face blurred past. Wind tore at Lyra's hair. Her stomach lurched into her throat. And then they hit the water. The cold was so absolute, so complete, that for a moment Lyra forgot how to breathe. The current grabbed them immediately, dragging them downstream with brutal force. She lost Kyle's hand, lost all sense of up or down. Her lungs screamed, darkness pressed in. And then something grabbed her, strong arms, pulling her up. Lyra's head broke the surface and she gasped, choking on air and water. Kyle had her. He was swimming, one-armed, the other holding her, fighting the current toward the far bank. They tumbled over rocks, slammed against ice, dragged through rapids that should have killed them. But Kyle didn't let go. Finally, they reached shallow water. Kyle hauled them both onto the bank, collapsing into the snow. For a long moment, they just lay there, coughing and shaking. Then Lyra started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity, the terror, the impossible fact that they were still alive. Kyle stared at her like she'd lost her mind. What's so funny? We jumped off a cliff. I noticed. You're insane. Probably. Lyra's laughter faded, replaced by something fierce and wild. She'd just shifted for the first time, lost her home, been hunted by mercenaries, and jumped off a cliff. And she'd never felt more alive. What now? She asked. Kale sat up, his eyes hard. Now we go to the capital, we find Corvin, and we end this. You can't just walk into the palace. They'll kill you. Then we don't walk in. A dangerous smile curved his mouth. We tear the door down. Lyra looked at him, this broken king who refused to stay dead, this alpha who'd helped her find her wolf, and she made her choice. Okay, she said. Let's go start a war. The capital rose from the valley like a sleeping beast of stone and iron. Lyra crouched beside Kyle on the ridgeline, her breath misting in the pre-dawn cold as she studied the sprawling city below. She'd never seen anything like it. The outer walls stretched for miles, thick enough to withstand siege engines. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter at regular intervals, torches burning like tiny stars against the darkness. And at the center, dominating everything, stood the palace, a massive fortress of black granite that seemed to swallow the light around it. This was the seat of power for the Northern Territories, the place where kings were made and broken, and they were about to walk straight into it. How many guards? Kyle asked quietly. Lyra counted the figures moving along the walls. 20 that I can see on the eastern gate alone, probably triple that inside. More. Corvin will have tripled security the moment I disappeared. Kyle's jaw tightened. He'll be expecting me to come back. The question is whether he thinks I'm already dead. They traveled for 5 days straight, keeping to the wilderness and avoiding the main roads. The journey had been brutal. No supplies, no shelter. Just 2 wolves running on instinct and desperation. Lyra's newly awakened wolf had screamed in protest the first 2 days, unused to the constant shifting and exertion. But Kyle had been patient, teaching her to control the change, to let her wolf strengthen her without overwhelming her human mind. By the 4th day, she'd been shifting as easily as breathing. By the 5th, she'd started to understand what her father had tried to tell her all those years ago, that being a wolf wasn't about power or dominance. It was about balance, about accepting both halves of yourself instead of trying to bury one. She glanced at Kale. He looked better than he had a week ago. The silver burns healed to faint scars. The wolf's bane finally purged from his system. But there were new lines around his eyes, new shadows that hadn't been there before. He was walking into a trap, and they both knew it. We could wait, Lyra said. Find allies first, build support. No time. Kyle's voice was flat. Every day I'm gone, Corvin consolidates power. He'll be moving to legitimize his claim to the throne. Once he does that, once the packs formally recognize him as king, it's over. I become a pretender, a rebel, and the kingdom tears itself apart in civil war. So instead we commit suicide. Kale's mouth quirked. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be. He turned to look at her fully, his pale eyes searching. You don't have to come with me. You've already done more than— Don't! Lyra's voice came out sharper than intended. Don't you dare try to protect me now. We're in this together. Lyra, you helped me find my wolf, helped me become something I thought was impossible. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not walking away, not from you, not from this. Something shifted in Kael's expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, possibly both. All right, then. He looked back at the capital, his features hardening into something cold and tactical. Then we do this smart. The main gate is out, too exposed, but there's a service entrance on the southern wall that leads to the palace kitchens, used for supply deliveries. If we can get inside before dawn, we can move through the lower levels while the guard change is happening. And then? Then we find Corvin before he finds us. Lyra's stomach nodded. You make it sound simple. It's not. It's going to be ugly and dangerous, and there's a very good chance we both die. Kael's voice dropped. But if we do nothing, more people die. Good people. Loyal people who don't deserve to be pawns in a traitor's game. He was right. Lyra knew he was right. That didn't make it any less terrifying. They moved down the ridge as the sun began to break over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The forest gave way to farmland, fields lying fallow under blankets of snow, small cottages with smoke rising from their chimneys. Normal people. Normal lives. Lives that would be destroyed if Corvin took the throne. The southern wall loomed ahead, taller up close than it had seemed from the ridge. Lyra's heart hammered as they approached the small iron gate Kael had mentioned. A single guard stood watch, looking bored and cold. Kael raised a hand, signaling Lyra to stop. Wait here, he murmured. Before she could protest, he stepped into the open, walking toward the guard with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. The guard's hand went to his sword. Halt. State your business. Kael kept walking. Delivery for the palace kitchens. Fresh game. You're early. Deliveries don't start until— The guard's voice cut off as recognition dawned. His eyes went wide. Your Majesty. Kael moved. One moment, he was 5 paces away. The next, his hand was clamped over the guard's mouth, dragging him backward into the shadows. There was a brief struggle, then nothing. Lyra rushed forward to find the guard unconscious, slumped against the wall. You didn't kill him, she said, surprised. He's just doing his job. Not his fault Corvin's a traitor. Kael pulled a set of keys from the guard's belt and unlocked the gate. Come on, we've got maybe 10 minutes before someone notices he's missing. They slipped inside. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, smelling of old stone and kitchen grease. Kael moved through it like a ghost, every turn precise, every step silent. Lyra followed, her newly sharpened senses picking up the sounds of the waking palace above, footsteps, voices, the clatter of pots and pans. They emerged into a storage room stacked with sacks of grain and barrels of salted meat. Kael paused, listening, then gestured for Lyra to follow him through a doorway into the kitchens proper. The space was massive, easily 50 feet long, with multiple hearths already blazing. A handful of servants moved through the pre-dawn routine, kneading bread dough and stoking fires. None of them looked up as Kael and Lyra passed through, just 2 more bodies in the organized chaos. They'd almost made it to the far exit when a voice called out, You there! New faces! Lyra's blood froze. An older woman stood blocking their path, her arms crossed and her expression severe. The head cook, judging by the way the other servants immediately busied themselves with greater intensity. Kael turned, his posture relaxed. Just passing through, ma'am. No one just passes through my kitchen. The woman's eyes narrowed. Who sent you? Head steward. We're here to inventory the wine cellars. At this hour? Don't insult my intelligence, boy. She took a step closer, and Lyra saw the moment recognition hit. The woman's face went pale. Merciful. Your Majesty? Kael's hand moved to his belt, where Lyra knew he'd hidden a knife taken from the guard. But before he could draw it, the woman dropped to one knee. Your Majesty, she said again, louder this time. Too loud. Every head in the kitchen turned. Lyra's heart stopped as she watched shock ripple through the servants. Some froze. Others gasped. One young man dropped the pot he was holding, sending it clattering across the stone floor. Please, Kael said quietly, stand up. The woman rose, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. They said you were dead. Lord Corvin called a formal mourning. He's to be coronated tomorrow. Tomorrow? Kael's voice sharpened. Not next week? He moved it up, said the kingdom needed stability, said the mourning period could be shortened given the circumstances. The woman's hands trembled. Your Majesty, if he finds you here... He won't. Not yet. Kael glanced at the assembled servants. I need your help. All of you. Silence. Then one by one, every servant in that kitchen dropped to their knees. We're yours, Your Majesty, the head cook said. Whatever you need. Relief flooded Lyra's chest. They had allies. Not many, but enough. Kael's expression softened. I need clothes. Guard uniforms if you can manage it, and I need to know where Corvin is right now. His chambers, most likely, doesn't rise until midday. The cook turned to a young woman hovering nearby. Mara, run to the laundry. Bring back 2 guard uniforms and be quick about it. The girl nodded and disappeared. There's more, Kael continued. I need to reach the throne room without being seen. Is that possible? The cook's face creased with worry. The guard change happens in 20 minutes. If you time it right, you might be able to slip through the confusion, but Your Majesty, the throne room will be locked. Only Corvin has the key now. Then I'll make my own entrance. Kael turned to Lyra. You should stay here. Wait until... We've been over this, Lyra interrupted. This is different. These are my people, my palace. I don't care. Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You're not doing this alone. I didn't come this far to sit in a kitchen while you get yourself killed. Kael stared at her, frustration and something else warring in his expression. You're impossible, he said finally. I've been told... The girl returned with the uniforms, simple leather and chainmail that bore the wolf insignia of the royal guard. Lyra and Kael changed quickly, tucking their hair under helmets and strapping on swords that felt foreign and heavy. When Lyra caught her reflection in a polished pot, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a soldier, like someone who belonged in this world of politics and power. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. Ready? Kael asked. No, not even close. Yes, Lyra said. They left through the servant corridors, following the cook's directions. The palace was beginning to wake around them. Nobles emerging from their chambers, guards assembling for morning drills, servants scurrying with purpose. Twice they passed other guards, and twice Kael simply nodded, his bearing so commanding that no one questioned them. But as they neared the throne room, Lyra felt her anxiety spike. This was it, the heart of enemy territory, the place where Corvin had built his conspiracy and murdered his way to power. The throne room doors loomed ahead, massive oak reinforced with iron bands, flanked by 4 guards in formal armor. We can't fight 4 of them without raising an alarm, Lyra whispered. We won't have to. Kael's eyes tracked something behind the guards. See that corridor? Leads to the royal archives. There's a hidden passage from there into the throne room. My father used it when he wanted to observe court proceedings without being seen. You think it's still there? Only one way to find out? They diverted down a side hallway, moving quickly. The archives were exactly where Kael remembered, a long room lined with shelves of leather-bound books and scrolls, empty at this hour. Kael went straight to the back wall, running his hands along the stonework until he found what he was looking for. He pressed, and a section of wall swung inward with a soft click. Darkness yawned beyond. After you, Kael said. Lyra stepped into the passage, her wolf's night vision adjusting instantly. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and it climbed steeply upward. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed for years. They climbed in silence, the only sound their breathing and the soft scrape of boots on stone. Finally, the passage leveled out. Ahead, Lyra could see faint light seeping through cracks in the wall. Kael moved past her, pressing his ear to the stone. I don't hear anyone. The room should be empty. Should be. He found the release mechanism and pushed. The wall section swung open, revealing the throne room beyond. Lyra's breath caught. The space was enormous. Soaring ceilings supported by pillars carved to look like ancient trees, walls hung with tapestries depicting the history of the wolf packs. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of black marble, stood the throne itself. A massive chair of carved stone and silver, shaped like a wolf mid-howl, the symbol of absolute authority over the Northern Territories. Empty. Kael stepped out of the passage, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Lyra followed, her hand instinctively moving to the sword at her hip. "Tomorrow," Kael said softly, staring at the throne. "Tomorrow Corvin was going to sit there and claim everything my family built, everything my father died protecting." "He won't," Lyra said. "We won't let him." Kael turned to her, and she saw something fierce burning in his eyes. "You're right. We won't." He started toward the throne, purpose in every stride. And that's when the doors burst open. Guards poured in, not 4 but 20, swords drawn and faces hard. And behind them, moving with unhurried confidence, came a man Lyra had never seen but recognized instantly. Lord Corvin Hale. He was tall and lean, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of refined features that spoke of noble breeding. He wore robes of deep purple trimmed with gold, the colors of the royal council. And when he smiled, it didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Kael," he said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend. "I had hoped the rumors of your death were true. How disappointing to be proven wrong." Kael's hand went to his sword. "Corvin, I should have known." "Should you? I thought I'd been quite subtle." Corvin descended the steps from the entrance, his guards fanning out to surround Kael and Lyra. "But I suppose it doesn't matter now. You're here, exactly where I want you." "This is over," Kael said, his voice deadly calm. "Surrender now, and I'll make your trial quick." Corvin laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "My trial, oh Kael. You still don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "That you've already lost." Corvin raised a hand and the guards closed in, weapons leveled. Lyra's heart hammered. They were outnumbered 10-1. The throne room had no other exits. They were trapped. Kael shifted his stance, preparing to fight, but before anyone could move, a sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps. Multiple sets, coming from the hallway beyond the main doors. Everyone turned, and Lyra's blood turned to ice. More guards entered, but these weren't wearing Corvin's colors. They were wearing the insignia of the eastern border packs, and the western mountain territories, and the southern river valleys. Pack leaders Lyra recognized from stories her father had told. Alphas who controlled vast territories. Wolves who commanded armies, dozens of them, all armed, all watching Kael with expressions that ranged from surprise to contempt. "What is this?" Kael demanded. Corvin's smile widened. "Your funeral, Your Majesty. Or should I say, your execution. You see, I didn't just plan to take the throne. I planned to make it legitimate." He gestured to the assembled pack leaders. "These fine alphas have all agreed that your father's line has grown weak, that the Northern Territories need stronger leadership. They've come to witness your death and recognize my coronation." One of the alphas, a massive man with scars covering his arms, stepped forward. "You abandoned your throne, boy. Left your kingdom leaderless. That's grounds for forfeit." "I was poisoned," Kael said, his voice hard. "By Corvin's mercenaries, by guards he paid to betray me." "Proof?" another alpha challenged. Kael had none. The mercenaries were dead or scattered. The guards who'd betrayed him had likely been killed to cover Corvin's tracks. "I thought not," Corvin said smoothly. "You see, Kael, the truth doesn't matter. Power does. And right now, I have it. These alphas support me. The guard follows me. The people believe you're dead." He moved closer, his expression almost pitying. "You're a ghost, and ghosts have no claim to thrones." Lyra's mind raced. This was worse than an ambush. This was a coup that had already succeeded. Corvin hadn't just tried to kill Kael. He'd systematically dismantled his support, turned his allies into enemies, and rewritten the narrative so that Kael became the villain. They'd walked into a trap with no way out. "So here's what's going to happen," Corvin continued. "You're going to surrender, quietly, and I'll make your death painless. Maybe even let your little companion live if she swears loyalty to me." His eyes flicked to Lyra, cold and assessing. "Never," she spat. Corvin shrugged. "Then you both die. Either way, this ends now. The guards advanced. Kyle drew his sword, the metal singing as it left the sheath. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Bold words from a dead man. And then everything happened at once. Kyle moved like lightning, surging toward Corvin. The guards rushed to intercept, but Kyle was faster, his blade flashing in deadly arcs that sent two men sprawling. Lyra drew her own sword, her movements clumsy but desperate. A guard came at her and she barely blocked his strike, the impact jarring her arm to the shoulder. "Lyra, shift!" Kyle shouted. She wanted to, tried to, but her wolf, still so new, still so unpracticed, wouldn't come. Fear had locked it away. The guard pressed his advantage, his blade sweeping toward her throat. And then something inside Lyra snapped. Not fear, not panic. Fury. She'd spent her entire life being told she was weak, broken, not enough. And she'd believed it. Let those words become chains that held her back. No more. Her wolf surged forward with a force that made her gasp. The change ripped through her in half a heartbeat, faster than it had ever been before, smooth and natural and perfect. The guard's eyes went wide as a white wolf landed where Lyra had been standing. She hit him like an avalanche, jaws closing on his sword arm. He screamed, dropping the weapon. Around her, chaos erupted. Kale had reached Corvin, their blades clashing with sparks and fury. The pack leaders were shouting, some calling for order, others drawing their own weapons. Guards converged from all sides. Lyra fought like something wild and desperate, her wolf's instincts guiding her. She was smaller than most wolves, but faster. She ducked under a sword strike, twisted around a spear thrust, her teeth finding flesh and armor. But there were too many. A blade caught her flank, opening a line of fire across her ribs. She yelped, stumbling. Another guard raised his crossbow, aiming at her heart, and Kyle roared. The sound wasn't human, wasn't even a normal alpha command. It was primal, ancient, the kind of dominance that made every wolf in the room freeze on instinct. Even Corvin stopped mid-strike, his expression shocked. Kale shifted, but not into a normal wolf. His form exploded outward, growing impossibly large. His fur was midnight black, his eyes blazing silver. He was easily twice the size of a normal alpha, a dire wolf, the kind that existed only in legends. The throne room fell silent. Impossible, Corvin breathed. Kyle's wolf prowled forward, and even the pack leaders backed away. The power radiating from him was suffocating, overwhelming, the kind of presence that made submission the only logical response. This wasn't just an alpha. This was the Alpha King. One of the pack leaders dropped to his knees, then another, and another. Within moments, every wolf in the room had bowed, including half of Corvin's guards. Corvin alone remained standing, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. No, this isn't, you can't. Kyle shifted back to human form, standing naked and furious in the center of the throne room. "I am the blood of the first wolves," he said, his voice echoing with power. "I carry the dire wolf within me as my father did, and his father before him. That is why I am king, not because of politics or alliances, because the wolf itself has chosen me." He took a step toward Corvin. "And you're nothing but a traitor who thought he could steal what he hadn't earned." Corvin's composure shattered. "Kill him!" he screamed at his guards. "Kill them both! I order you!" But the guards didn't move. They couldn't. The direwolf's dominance was absolute. Corvin's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, finding none. He ran, bolted for the doors like a rabbit fleeing a predator. Kyle didn't chase him, didn't need to, because Lyra did. Her white wolf shot across the throne room, fueled by rage and adrenaline. She caught Corvin 3 steps from the exit, her jaws clamping onto his ankle and dragging him down. He hit the marble hard, screaming. "Please," he gasped. "Please, I'll give you anything. Money, land, anything you want." Lyra shifted back to human, her hand closing around Corvin's throat. Blood from the wound on her ribs dripped onto his expensive robes. "You tried to kill a good man," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You destroyed lives to feed your ambition, and you would have torn this kingdom apart for power." "I'm sorry," Corvin choked out. "I'm sorry." "No, you're just caught." Kyle appeared beside her, tossing her a guard's cloak to cover herself. His eyes never left Corvin. "Lyra," he said quietly, "let him go." She hesitated, her hand tightening. Let him go, Kael repeated. This has to be done right, publicly, so everyone knows what he did. Slowly, reluctantly, Lyra released Corvin. Guards hauled the traitor to his feet, binding his hands. Kael turned to face the assembled pack leaders, his presence still radiating power, even in human form. This man poisoned me, sent mercenaries to finish the job, and tried to steal my throne through lies and murder. His voice carried to every corner of the room. Does anyone here dispute this? Silence. Then bear witness. Lord Corvin Hale is guilty of high treason, and the sentence is death. Corvin's face went white. No, wait, you can't. Kael drew a sword from one of the guards. I can, and I will, but not here. He looked at the pack leaders. Spread the word. At sunset tomorrow, justice will be served in the public square. Let everyone see what happens to traitors. The pack leaders bowed their acceptance. Corvin was dragged away, screaming promises and threats that no one listened to. And Lyra stood in the center of the throne room, her ribs burning and her hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. Kael turned to her, and for the first time since entering the palace, he smiled. We did it, he said softly. Lyra wanted to smile back, wanted to celebrate. But something felt wrong. The pack leaders were leaving, filing out with murmured conversations. The guards were returning to their posts. Everything was falling back into order, too easily. Her instinct screamed at her, but she couldn't identify why. And then she saw it. One of the pack leaders, a woman with iron-gray hair and hard eyes, pausing at the door, looking back at Kael with an expression that wasn't respect or relief. It was calculation, cold, measuring, predatory. The woman caught Lyra watching and smiled. Then she was gone. Lyra's blood ran cold. Kael, she said slowly, I think we have a problem. He frowned. What kind of problem? The kind where Corvin wasn't working alone. Before Kael could respond, a guard rushed in, his face pale. Your Majesty, the dungeons. Someone's freed the prisoners. Kael's expression darkened. Which prisoners? All of them, including, the guard swallowed hard, including the rebels from the Western territories, the ones your father imprisoned for trying to start a civil war. And just like that, Lyra understood. Corvin had been a distraction, a convenient villain to expose and execute. But the real conspiracy, the real threat, it was just beginning. The dungeon stank of rot and old blood. Kael descended the stone steps 3 at a time, Lyra right behind him, still wrapped in the guard's cloak that barely covered her. The wound on her ribs had already stopped bleeding, her wolf's healing kicking in faster than she'd expected, but the pain was still there, sharp and insistent with every breath. Behind them, a dozen royal guards followed, their faces grim. How many escaped? Kael demanded of the dungeon master, a grizzled man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. 17, Your Majesty, maybe more. They took the keys, opened every cell. The man's hands shook as he gestured to the corridor lined with iron doors, all standing open. The night watch is dead, throats cut. Kael's jaw clenched. And no one heard anything? The cells are warded against sound, Your Majesty, your father's order to prevent prisoners from coordinating, which meant whoever freed them knew the palace intimately, knew its weaknesses, its blind spots. Lyra moved past Kael into the first cell, her enhanced senses cataloging everything. The shackles hung empty, the straw bedding was disturbed, and there, on the wall, someone had scratched a symbol into the stone. A wolf's head split down the middle, one half facing east, the other west. Kael, she said quietly, look at this. He came to stand beside her, his expression darkening when he saw the mark. The divided pack. What's that? A resistance movement. Started 5 years ago when my father unified the eastern and western territories. Some of the old pack leaders didn't want to give up their autonomy. They fought back, tried to fracture the alliance. Kael's voice was bitter. My father crushed them, imprisoned the leaders. I thought that was the end of it. But someone kept it alive. Someone with resources, with patience, with enough influence to coordinate an ambush on the king, a political coup, and a prison break. Kael turned to the guards. I want every exit to the city sealed, no one in or out, and I want a list of everyone who had access to the dungeons in the last 48 hours. Yes, Your Majesty. As the guards dispersed, Lyra caught Kael's arm. The woman, the pack leader with gray hair who was in the throne room. I saw the way she looked at you, like she was measuring you for a coffin. Kael's eyes narrowed. Marin Blackwood, alpha of the Western Mountain Packs. She swore loyalty to my father after the war, but it was always fragile. She lost 2 sons in the fighting. You think she's part of this? I think someone is, and whoever it is, they're not done. He looked around the empty cells, his expression grim. Corvin was supposed to be the distraction, the obvious villain, while the real architects of this coup stayed hidden in the shadows. A cold knot formed in Lyra's stomach. What do we do? We smoke them out, force them to show their hand before they're ready. Kael started back toward the stairs, purpose in every stride. And we do it at Corvin's execution, tomorrow at sunset. The entire city will be watching. It's the perfect opportunity for them to make a move. That's insane. You'll be completely exposed. Exactly. That's the point. But Lyra grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. You're using yourself as bait. I'm forcing them to commit. Right now they have the advantage. They know who we are, but we don't know who they are. We change that. We level the playing field. Or you get yourself killed. Kael's expression softened. Then I need you to make sure that doesn't happen. The weight of those words settled over her like snow. He was trusting her, not as a subject, not as someone he'd saved, as an equal. How? Lyra asked. I don't know yet, but we've got until sunset tomorrow to figure it out. They climbed back to the palace proper, emerging into corridors now buzzing with activity. Word of the prison break had spread. Guards rushed past carrying weapons. Servants whispered in corners. The entire palace felt like a storm about to break. Kael led Lyra to his private chambers, a suite of rooms that somehow felt both opulent and austere. Rich tapestries hung on the walls, but the furniture was simple, functional, a soldier's quarters dressed up as royalty. He gestured for her to sit, then moved to a cabinet and pulled out clothing. These were my mother's. They should fit you better than that cloak. Lyra took the offered garments, simple trousers and a tunic in deep blue, soft as water. Thank you. She changed quickly, grateful to be in something that actually covered her. When she turned back, Kael was standing at the window, staring out at the city below. Tell me about your father, Lyra said. Kael didn't turn. Why? Because I need to understand what you're fighting for. Who you're fighting for. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice distant. He was a good king, fair, just, but he was also ruthless when he needed to be. The territories were fractured when he took the throne, dozens of packs all fighting for dominance. He spent 30 years unifying them, forcing them to see that together we were stronger than we could ever be apart. The divided pack didn't agree. No. They saw unity as weakness, as a loss of identity. They wanted to return to the old ways, constant warfare, territorial disputes, the strong preying on the weak. Kael's hands clenched on the windowsill. My father gave them a choice, join willingly or be forced to submit. Most chose unity. A few chose war. And you inherited that war. I inherited the consequences of it. The resentment. The grudges. He finally turned to look at her. My father's greatest strength was his conviction. He never doubted he was right. But He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. I wonder sometimes if unity was worth the cost, if forcing people to bend the knee just creates stronger enemies. Lyra moved to stand beside him. You're nothing like Corvin. You know that, right? Corvin wanted power for its own sake. He stopped, shaking his head. I don't even know what I want anymore. I just know I can't let everything my father built burn because I wasn't strong enough to protect it. You're strong enough, Lyra said firmly. You carried the weight of an entire kingdom while being poisoned and hunted. You revealed yourself as a dire wolf when you could have stayed hidden. You're stronger than you think. Kael looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. You saved my life, twice now. I haven't forgotten that. I'm not keeping count.
Maybe you should, because I owe you everything. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. When this is over, when we've stopped whoever's behind this, I want you to stay. Not as a subject, as... He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The air between them felt charged, electric. Lyra's heart hammered. Kael! A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Kael pulled back, his expression shifting instantly to something harder, more controlled. Enter. The door opened to reveal a young man in scholar's robes, his arms full of books and scrolls. Your Majesty, I came as quickly as I could. Silas, Kael's voice warmed. Thank you. Did you find anything? The scholar dumped his burden onto a table, parchment spilling everywhere. More than I expected.
The divided pack kept detailed records of their activities before they were imprisoned. Manifestos, correspondence, plans for after they overthrew your father. He pulled out a particular scroll, unrolling it. This is a list of sympathizers, people who supported their cause but never openly declared loyalty. Look at the names. Kael scanned the list and Lyra watched his face go pale. Half the Royal Council. 3 pack leaders. Even some of my own guard commanders. There's more. Silas pulled out another document. This is dated 3 months ago. Someone smuggled it into the dungeon. Lyra leaned in to read. It was a letter, written in elegant script. Brothers and sisters of the true path, your imprisonment will not last. Plans are in motion. The weak king will fall, and with him the chains of false unity. When the wolf is divided, we are strongest. Be ready. It was unsigned. Who sent this? Kael demanded. I don't know, but the handwriting... Silas hesitated. I've seen it before. An official palace correspondence. You're saying someone inside the palace is coordinating this. Someone with authority. Someone trusted. Kael's expression turned to stone. Find out who. Cross-reference the handwriting with every document in the archives if you have to. I want a name by morning. Yes, Your Majesty. Silas gathered his materials and left. Lyra felt the pieces clicking into place. This isn't just about taking the throne. It's about destroying everything your father built, fracturing the territories back into warring packs. And using me as the catalyst. If I die publicly, violently, it proves their point, that unity is a lie, that the king can't protect himself, let alone his people. Kael's jaw tightened. They're going to use Corvin's execution as the trigger, strike when everyone's gathered, when chaos is guaranteed. Then we don't execute him publicly. We do it privately. Cancel the gathering. No, because that makes me look weak, makes it look like I'm afraid. Kael started pacing, his mind visibly working through scenarios. We need to turn their plan against them, let them commit to the attack, then expose them in front of everyone. That's still using yourself as bait. I'm the king. I'm always bait. He stopped, looking at her. But I'll have you. And I trust you more than anyone else in this palace right now. The words hit harder than they should have. Trust. From a king who'd been betrayed by his own guards, who'd watched his kingdom turn on him. Tell me what you need, Lyra said. Kael's expression turned calculating. I need you to do something no one will expect. Something that will either save us or doom us both. What? I need you to become my Luna. Lyra's breath caught. What? Not actually, not yet, but publicly. Tomorrow, before the execution, I'll announce that I found my mate. That you're to be crowned Luna of the Northern Territories. Kael's words came faster now, the plan taking shape. It accomplishes 2 things. First, it legitimizes your presence at my side, gives you authority no one can question. Second, it forces the conspirators to recalculate. They're planning to kill a lone king, not a mated pair. You want to use our bond as a weapon. I want to use everything we have, including the fact that no one knows what you're capable of. His eyes burned with intensity. They've seen you shift. They know you're a wolf, but they don't know about your healing abilities, your father's training. They'll underestimate you. I don't have healing abilities. I can barely control my shift. Are you sure about that? Lyra frowned. What do you mean? Kael gestured to her ribs. That wound you took in the throne room. It should have taken days to heal, but it's already closed. I saw it happen. Lyra's hand went to her side, probing gently. He was right. The gash that had been bleeding freely an hour ago was now just a thin pink line. "My wolf," she started. "Your wolf is healing you faster than normal, faster than even an alpha should heal. That's not standard regeneration, Lyra. That's something else." She thought back to the cabin, to the weeks she'd spent tending Kyle wounds, watching him recover from injuries that should have killed him. She'd attributed it to his strength, his alpha nature. But what if it had been her? What if, without realizing it, she'd been healing him? "My father was a healer," she said slowly. "He tried to teach me, but I could never make it work. The herbs, the remedies, they required connection to your wolf, and mine was dormant. But it's not anymore." Kyle moved closer. "Test it. On me. The silver burns from the arrow. They're healed, but I can still feel the poison in my system. Like an ache in my bones. See if you can help." Lyra hesitated, then placed her hand against his chest, over his heart. She closed her eyes, reaching for her wolf the way she'd learned to over the past week. It came easily now, a warm presence in her mind. But this time, she didn't just feel her wolf. She felt something else. A current of energy flowing through her, warm and bright and alive. It moved from her core, down her arm, into her palm, into Kyle. His sharp intake of breath told her it was working. She opened her eyes to find silver light, faint but undeniable, glowing beneath her hand. Kyle's skin seemed to drink it in, the shadows under his eyes fading, the tension in his shoulders easing. When she pulled away, he looked stronger, clearer. "How do you feel?" she asked. Kyle flexed his hands, his expression awed. "Like the poison's gone, completely. Like I could shift right now without any pain." Lyra stared at her own palm, watching the silver light fade. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" "I don't know. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that you can do it." Kyle gripped her shoulders. "Tomorrow, when the attack comes, and it will come. This is how we survive. You keep me alive, keep the guards alive, turn the tide when they think they've won. I've never done this in combat. I don't even know if I can control it." "Then we practice. Right now. All night, if we have to." And they did. For hours, Lyra worked to understand this new ability. She healed paper cuts on servants, mended bruises on guards, closed a gash on a stable boy who'd been kicked by a horse. Each time the silver light came easier, brighter, more focused. By dawn, she could heal a deep wound in seconds. By mid-morning, she could do it without even touching the injury, just by being close. Kale watched it all with an expression caught between hope and something that looked almost like reverence. "You're not just a wolf," he said as the sun climbed toward noon. "You're something the territories haven't seen in generations. A healer wolf. My father's records spoke of them. Alphas who could mend as easily as they could kill. They were considered sacred, proof that wolves weren't just monsters." "I'm not sacred," Lyra said, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "I'm just extraordinary." Kale's voice was soft, and exactly what this kingdom needs. The execution was scheduled for sunset. As the hour approached, Lyra stood in Kyle's chambers, dressed in formal robes that marked her as Luna Designate. Deep blue silk embroidered with silver wolves, a circlet of white gold resting on her brow. She looked like someone else entirely, someone who belonged in this world of politics and power. She hated it. "You look perfect," Kyle said from behind her. Lyra turned to find him in full royal regalia, black and silver, a crown of worked metal shaped like wolf teeth, a sword at his hip that looked like it had tasted blood before. "I look like I'm playing dress-up. You look like a Luna." He moved to stand beside her, adjusting her circlet slightly. "Ready?" "No." "Yes," she said. They descended to the palace courtyard where a massive crowd had already gathered. Thousands of people packed into every available space, nobles in fine clothes, commoners in simple wool, guards forming a perimeter. All eyes turned as Kyle appeared, Lyra at his side. A platform had been erected in the center, with a chopping block stained dark from previous use. Corvin knelt beside it, his hands bound, his face pale but defiant. Kale raised a hand for silence. The crowd obeyed instantly. "People of the Northern Territories," his voice rang out, amplified by the acoustics of the courtyard.
You know why we're here. This man, Lord Corvin Hale, committed high treason. He poisoned your king, sent assassins, tried to steal the throne through lies and murder. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But before justice is served, I have an announcement. Cale turned to Lyra, taking her hand. I have found my mate. This woman, Lyra Vance, will be crowned Luna of the Northern Territories. She will stand beside me, rule beside me. And together, we will ensure that no traitor ever threatens this kingdom again. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in shocked whispers. Lyra felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, judging, measuring. And then she felt something else, a presence, hostile, moving through the crowd, multiple presences. Her wolf surged in warning. Cale, she murmured, they're here. I know, stay close. Cale drew his sword and drove it through Corvin's heart in one clean thrust. The traitor's eyes went wide, then empty. The crowd roared, approval, bloodlust, vindication. And that's when the attack came. Arrows flew from 3 different directions. Lyra saw them in slow motion, tracking toward Cale's head, his chest, his throat. She moved on instinct. Silver light exploded from her hands, forming a barrier of pure energy. The arrows hit it and disintegrated, reduced to ash. The crowd screamed, scattering in every direction. Armed figures emerged from the chaos, rebels wearing the divided wolf symbol, weapons drawn. At least 20 of them, coordinated and lethal. But Cale was ready. He shifted mid-stride, his direwolf form crashing into the nearest attacker. Guards loyal to him closed ranks, forming a defensive circle. Lyra didn't shift. She didn't need to. She raised her hands and let the healing light become something else, something that could shield, protect, turn blades aside and arrows into dust. A rebel rushed her, and she caught his sword bare-handed, the metal glowing white-hot in her grip, until he dropped it screaming. Another came from behind and she spun, her light lashing out like a whip, throwing him backward. She could feel them now, the wounded guards, the injured bystanders caught in the crossfire. Her power reached out to them, mending torn flesh, stopping bleeding, keeping them alive even as the battle raged. This was what her father had tried to teach her. Not just healing, but the ability to be a sanctuary in the middle of violence. Cale's direwolf tore through the rebels with brutal efficiency, his dominance keeping them from coordinating effectively. But then Lyra saw her, Marin Blackwood, the gray-haired pack leader, standing at the edge of the courtyard, not fighting, just watching, calculating. Their eyes met, and Marin smiled, cold and cruel and certain. Then she turned and disappeared into the fleeing crowd. Cale, Lyra shouted. Blackwood! She's running! Cale's head snapped around, following Lyra's gesture. He shifted back to human form, bloodied but unbroken. Guards! Seal the gates! No one leaves! But it was too late. In the chaos, Marin had vanished. The remaining rebels either surrendered or were cut down. Within minutes, the courtyard was secured, bodies being cleared, the wounded being tended.
Lyra collapsed against a pillar, her power exhausted, her hand shaking. Cale appeared beside her, wrapping a cloak around his shoulders. Are you hurt? No. You? Fine. He looked at the carnage, his expression grim. They committed, showed their hand, but Blackwood escaped. She's the leader, isn't she? One of them, at least. Cale helped Lyra to her feet. But we learned something valuable today. What? That you're more powerful than any of us realized. You didn't just protect me. You protected everyone in range. The casualties should have been in the dozens. Instead, he gestured to the wounded being helped away. Maybe 5 dead. The rest will survive because of you. Lyra looked at her hands, still faintly glowing with residual silver light. All her life she'd been told she was broken, useless, a wolf without teeth. But standing here in the aftermath of a battle she'd helped win, she finally understood the truth. She'd never been broken, she'd just been waiting to find the right fight. What happens now? She asked. Cale's expression hardened. Now we hunt down everyone involved in this conspiracy. Starting with Marin Blackwood. A guard approached, breathing hard. Your Majesty, we found something in the prisoner's cells, a map. It shows troop positions, rebel forces gathered in the western mountains. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Kael's jaw tightened. They're not done. They're planning a full rebellion. Can we stop them? I don't know. Our forces are spread thin. Most of our army is at the borders. He looked at Lyra. But we have something they don't. What's that? Hope. And a Luna who can keep our soldiers alive even when they should die. Kael's eyes blazed. We're going to war, Lyra, and we're going to win. The War Council convened at dawn. Lyra stood beside Kael at the head of a massive table carved from ancient oak, watching as pack leaders and military commanders filed into the chamber. Their faces were hard, skeptical, measuring her with eyes that had seen 100 battles and trusted nothing that looked soft. She didn't look soft anymore. The formal Luna robes had been replaced with leather armor, practical and fitted. Her white hair was pulled back in a warrior's braid, and at her hip hung a blade she'd learned to use over the past 3 sleepless nights. But the real weapon was her hands, still faintly glowing with the silver light she could no longer fully suppress. "Gentlemen," Kael said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "You've all seen the intelligence. Marin Blackwood has gathered an army in the western mountains, 3,000 strong, maybe more. They're moving toward the capital as we speak." A grizzled commander with a scar bisecting his face leaned forward. "Our forces number barely 1,500. Most are scattered across the territories maintaining border security. Even if we recall them, they won't arrive in time." "Then we don't wait for them." Kael's finger traced a line on the map spread before them. "We march to meet Blackwood's army here, the Frost Valley Pass. It's a natural choke point. Her numbers won't matter if she can't bring them to bear all at once." Another pack leader, a woman with silver streaking her dark hair, shook her head. "That's suicide. Even in a choke point, we're outnumbered 2 to 1. Our soldiers will be slaughtered." "Not if they can't die," Lyra said quietly. Every head turned toward her. The scarred commander's lip curled. "With all due respect, my lady, healing a few cuts in the palace courtyard is different from keeping an army alive in the middle of battle." "Is it?" Lyra met his gaze steadily. "Because I kept 30 people alive during an assassination attempt while simultaneously fighting off attackers. I think I can handle more." "You think—" "She knows." Kael's voice was steel. "I've seen what she can do. And more importantly, I trust her. That should be enough." Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, an older pack leader, one of the few who'd remained loyal throughout the coup, spoke. "Your Majesty, we follow you. We always have. But you're asking us to bet everything on an Omega who awakened her wolf less than 2 weeks ago. An Omega who has no combat experience, no tactical training, and who until recently was living alone in the mountains like a hermit." The words were brutal, accurate, and they made Lyra's wolf snarl with fury. She slammed her hands on the table, and silver light exploded outward, washing over every person in the room. It didn't hurt, just touched them, warm and electric, filling the space between heartbeats. When it faded, the cut on the scarred commander's face had healed. The silver-haired pack leader's arthritic hands were moving freely for the first time in years. Minor injuries they'd all been carrying, old wounds, chronic pains, the accumulated damage of lives spent fighting, were simply gone. They stared at her in shock. "I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm Luna," Lyra said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm asking you to trust me because I can do what no one else can. I can turn a desperate battle into a winnable one. I can keep your soldiers alive long enough to cut down an army that thinks it's already won. And I can make sure that when this is over, those soldiers go home to their families instead of being burned on pyres." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "So you can doubt me all you want. Question my experience, my training, my past. But when we're standing in that valley, bleeding and dying and wondering if we made the right choice, you'll remember this moment and you'll be grateful I'm on your side." The silence that followed was different, respectful, maybe even a little awed. The scarred commander touched his face where the scar had been, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly he dropped to one knee. "My Luna," he said simply. One by one, the others followed. Kael's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing once. When the council resumed, there were no more objections. They marched at noon. 1,500 soldiers moving through snow and ice toward a battle that would determine the fate of the northern territories. Lyra rode beside Kael at the head of the column, her newly trained wolf lending her the strength to keep pace despite having never ridden into war before. The journey took 2 days. 2 days of cold camps and colder glares from soldiers who still didn't quite believe in the broken Omega who'd somehow become their Luna. 2 days of Kael drilling tactics into her head until she could recite formations in her sleep. And 2 days of Lyra pushing her healing abilities further than she'd thought possible, learning to extend her range, to sense injuries from a distance, to draw on reserves of power that seemed bottomless. On the second night, as they made camp in the shadow of the mountains, a young soldier approached her fire. He couldn't have been more than 18, his face still carrying the softness of youth despite the armor he wore. "My lady," he said nervously, "I was wondering, that is, I wanted to ask—" "Sit," Lyra said gently. He did, his hands twisting in his lap. "My sister, she's sick, has been for months. The healers say there's nothing they can do, that her wolf is eating her from the inside, trying to emerge but trapped somehow." His voice cracked. "They say she'll be dead within the year." Lyra's chest tightened. She knew that pain, had lived it. "What's her name?" "Elena. She's 14. After the battle, if we survive, bring her to me. I can't promise anything, but—" Lyra met his desperate eyes. "I'll try." The boy's face crumpled with relief. Thank you, my lady." He left, and Lyra sat staring into the flames, thinking about all the broken wolves out there. All the people told they weren't enough, weren't whole, weren't worth saving. "You can't save everyone," Kael said, emerging from the darkness to sit beside her. "I know, but I can try. That's what makes you dangerous." His voice was soft. "Not your power, your compassion, the fact that you refuse to accept that some people are beyond help." Lyra looked at him. "Is that a bad thing?" "No. It's the thing that's going to win us this war." Kael's hand found hers. "Because Marin and her rebels, they believe wolves are meant to be divided, meant to fight and kill and prove dominance. But you? You prove that strength can look like healing, that power can look like mercy, and that scares them more than any army." His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and certain. "Tomorrow," she said, "when the fighting starts, we win, together." "You sound sure." "I am." Kael's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Because I'm not just fighting for a throne anymore. I'm fighting for you, for us, for the future we're going to build." Lyra's breath caught. "Kael—" He kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, his hand cupping her face like she was something precious, something worth protecting. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra's heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Win first," she managed. "Then we can talk about the future." Kael smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "Deal." The Frost Valley Pass was a wound carved into the mountains by ancient glaciers. Lyra stood at its narrowest point, watching Kael position their forces with the precision of someone who'd studied warfare his entire life. The pass itself was maybe 50 yards wide, hemmed in by sheer cliffs on both sides. Perfect for nullifying superior numbers, perfect for a slaughter if things went wrong. "They'll hit us with everything they have right at the start," Kael said, walking the line with her, "trying to break through before we can establish a solid defense. Your job is to keep the front line alive, no matter what. What about you?" "I'll be in the thick of it, leading from the front." Lyra grabbed his arm. "That's insane. That's what kings do." His expression was grim. "The soldiers need to see me fighting beside them. Need to know I'm not sending them to die while I hide behind walls. That I'm fighting beside you. Lyra, no arguments. We do this together or not at all." Kael stared at her, frustration and affection warring in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "Together. But if things go bad, you run. Promise me." "I promise," Lyra lied. The rebels appeared an hour before sunset. They came like a dark tide, pouring into the far end of the valley with war cries that echoed off the cliffs. Thousands of them, armed and armored, moving with the coordination of a real army. At their head rode Marin Blackwood, her gray hair streaming behind her like a banner. Even from a distance, Lyra could feel the woman's fury, her absolute certainty that she was right. Kael shifted into his direwolf form, and the soldiers around them roared their approval. The sound was deafening, primal, a declaration that they would not go quietly into the dark. The rebels charged. The two armies collided like thunder. Lyra lost all sense of time. The world became a blur of violence and noise, steel on steel, screams of rage and pain, the wet sounds of flesh tearing. Her power exploded outward, a dome of silver light that covered the entire front line. A soldier took a spear through the shoulder. The silver light pulsed, and the wound closed instantly, the spear clattering uselessly to the ground. Another had his arm nearly severed by a blade. Lyra's power knit bone and muscle back together before he could even fall. Again and again, her healing turned certain death into survivable injury, turned fatal wounds into scars that would heal. But there were so many. For every soldier she saved, 3 more were wounded. The rebels kept coming, throwing themselves against the defensive line with suicidal determination. And Lyra could feel her power starting to strain. Kael fought like a force of nature, his direwolf form tearing through enemies with brutal efficiency. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once. The line was breaking. Lyra saw it happening, the western flank starting to fold, rebels pouring through the gap. If they collapsed completely, the battle was over. She made a choice. Abandoning her position, she sprinted toward the failing flank, her power gathered in her hands like a storm ready to break. A rebel swung a sword at her head. She caught it barehanded, the blade shattering against her silver light. Another came from the side, and she blasted him backward with a pulse of pure energy. She reached the gap and planted herself in the center. "Hold!" she screamed at the retreating soldiers. "Hold this line!" They stared at her like she'd lost her mind, this small woman standing alone against a tide of armed warriors. Then the silver light erupted. Not just healing anymore, not just protection, raw power, channeled through her wolf and amplified by something she didn't understand. It spread out like roots, connecting her to every soldier on the field. She felt their pain, their fear, their desperation, and she fed them strength. The exhausted soldiers felt energy flood back into their limbs. The wounded found their injuries healing faster than before. Even those on the edge of breaking felt courage surge through them like fire. They stopped retreating, started fighting back. The western flank held, but the effort nearly killed Lyra. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, her vision swimming. Blood dripped from her nose, the cost of pushing her power beyond its limits. A shadow fell over her. Merrin Blackwood stood there, sword drawn, eyes cold with contempt. "So you're the Omega who thinks she can change everything," Merrin said. Pathetic. Lyra tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her power was spent, her wolf too exhausted to shift. Merrin raised her blade. "Nothing personal, but you represent everything wrong with Kael's vision. Weakness elevated, tradition destroyed. You die, and this whole experiment dies with you." The sword descended, and Kael hit Merrin like an avalanche. His dire wolf form slammed into her, sending them both tumbling across the blood-soaked ground. They rolled apart, both shifting to human form, circling each other with murder in their eyes. "You were my father's friend," Kael said, his voice raw. "You swore loyalty." "I swore loyalty to the old ways," Merrin spat, "to strength and dominance and the natural order. Your father betrayed that when he forced unity. You betray it by elevating a broken Omega to Luna. She's not broken. She's what this kingdom needs." "She's weakness made flesh." Merrin's face twisted with rage. "And I'll prove it by killing her in front of you." She shifted, her wolf massive and battle-scarred. Kael matched her, his direwolf form dwarfing hers. They clashed in a fury of teeth and claws. Around them, the battle raged on, but all eyes kept drifting to the two alphas locked in mortal combat. This was more than a fight. This was the clash of two ideologies, two visions for the future. Lyra watched, helpless, as Kael and Merrin tore into each other with savage intensity. Both were bleeding, both were slowing, and then Merrin made her move. She feinted left, then lunged right, her jaws closing on Kael's throat. Time seemed to stop. Kael couldn't break free, couldn't counter. In seconds, Merrin's bite would crush his windpipe, and Lyra felt something inside her break. Not her body, not her power, every barrier she'd ever built. every wall she'd erected to protect herself from the pain of being rejected, being called broken, being told she didn't belong. They shattered, and the power that flooded out was like nothing she'd ever felt. Silver light exploded from her in a wave that washed over the entire battlefield. It didn't heal this time. It didn't shield. It burned. Every rebel soldier caught in the light screamed as their weapons turned white-hot in their hands. Their armor became too heavy to bear. Their wolves retreated in instinctive terror from power that felt older than the mountains themselves. The light poured into Kael, strengthening him beyond anything natural. His dire wolf form grew larger, stronger, fed by Lyra's power until Marin's bite couldn't hold him. He twisted, breaking free, and his jaws found Marin's throat. One snap. Marin Blackwood fell, her eyes wide with shock, and shifted back to human form as she died. The battlefield went silent. Kael stood over her body, breathing hard, his dire wolf form slowly shrinking back to normal. Around them, the rebel army had dropped their weapons, their will to fight shattered by what they'd witnessed. Lyra rose on shaking legs, her power finally spent. Kael shifted to human form and came to her, catching her before she could fall. "What was that?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know," Lyra admitted, "but it's over. We won." The rebels surrendered within the hour. The pack leaders who'd supported Marin were stripped of their titles and territories. The common soldiers were offered a choice: swear loyalty to Kael or leave the territories forever. Most swore. Lyra stood on the battlefield as the sun set, watching medics tend to the wounded. The casualties had been heavy despite her efforts. Hundreds dead, hundreds more injured, but thousands had survived who shouldn't have. A young healer approached her nervously. "My lady, we need your help. There are soldiers who won't make it through the night without—" "Show me where." She spent the next 3 days moving through the medical tents, healing everyone she could reach. The young soldier who had asked about his sister brought Elena to her, and Lyra spent an entire night coaxing the girl's trapped wolf to the surface. When Elena finally shifted for the first time, her brother wept with relief. News of what Lyra had done spread like wildfire. The broken Omega who'd become Luna, the healer who'd turned to battle, the woman who'd burned an army with pure light. The stories grew with each telling, taking on the quality of legend. But to Lyra, it was simpler than that. She'd found her purpose, found the thing her wolf had always been meant to do. Not fighting, not dominating, healing, protecting, making broken things whole. On the 7th day after the battle, Kael found her sitting by a stream, watching the water flow clear and cold over ancient stones. "The council wants to hold the coronation," he said, sitting beside her. "Make you officially Luna. There's support from all the territories now, even the ones who backed Marin, because they're afraid of me, because they respect you." Kael's hand found hers. "You saved their soldiers, healed their wounded, proved that strength doesn't have to look like violence." Lyra was quiet for a moment, then, "That boy, the one with the sick sister. Do you know what he said to me after I healed Elena?" "What?" "He said, you gave me back hope. Not thank you. Not you saved her life. He said I gave him back hope." She looked at Kael, tears pricking her eyes. "That's what I want to do. Not rule. Not sit on a throne. I want to find all the broken wolves like me and show them they're not alone." "You can do both," Kael said gently. "As Luna, you'd have the authority and resources to help more people than you ever could alone. And if I'm terrible at politics, if I make mistakes, then you make them, and we fix them together." He turned her to face him fully. "Lyra, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be you. The woman who carried a dying stranger through a blizzard, who found her wolf when everyone said it was impossible, who stood in front of an army and refused to let them break." He pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a ring, simple silver work to look like a wolf in mid-howl. "Marry me. Not because I'm king and need a Luna, but because I love you. Because you make me want to build a kingdom worthy of the hope you represent." Lyra's throat tightened. "You love me? From the moment you told me I was being an idiot for wanting to run back to the capital before I'd healed. Maybe even before that." Kael's smile was soft. "So what do you say? Will you marry a king who's terrible at staying out of danger and has a kingdom full of problems that will take decades to fix?" Lyra looked at the ring, at Kael. at the future stretching out before them, uncertain and difficult and beautiful. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition." "Name it." "We go back to that cabin, the one where you almost died, where I found my wolf, and we make it a sanctuary, a place where broken wolves can come to heal, to find themselves, to learn they're not alone." Kale's eyes shone. "Done. We'll make it the first of many." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. The coronation was held in the capital 3 weeks later. Lyra stood before the assembled packs, wearing robes of silver and white, a crown of worked gold resting on her brow. The same people who'd questioned her, doubted her, called her broken, now bowed as she passed. Kyle crowned her himself, his hand steady, his voice ringing out across the throne room. "I present to you Lyra Vance, Luna of the Northern Territories. Healer, protector, the light in the darkness." The crowd roared its approval, and Lyra, standing beside the man she loved, looked out at the kingdom they would build together and felt something she'd never truly known before. Belonging. Not because she'd proven herself to people who'd rejected her, but because she'd proven herself to the only person who mattered, herself. Months later, after the celebrations had faded and the territories had settled into an uneasy but hopeful peace, Lyra and Kyle returned to the mountain cabin. It had been rebuilt, expanded, not a palace but a home, a place of warmth and healing. They stood on the porch as snow began to fall, watching the sun set over the peaks that had once been Lyra's prison. "Do you ever miss it?" Kyle asked. "The solitude, the simplicity." Lyra thought about it, about the years she'd spent alone, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. "No," she said finally, "because I was never free here. I was hiding." "And now?" She looked at him, this king who'd helped her find her strength, this man who'd stood beside her when the world tried to break them both. "Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The first snow of winter settled on their shoulders, and somewhere in the valley below, a young wolf howled, uncertain and afraid, calling out for guidance. Lyra smiled. "Come on," she said, taking Kyle's hand. "We have work to do." Together, they walked into the gathering dark, ready to answer the call of every broken wolf who needed to know they weren't alone. And the kingdom they built, one healed heart at a time, became something no one had thought possible. Not a realm held together by force, but a family bound by hope.